Hello, this is From Caracas, and I am Ray Gomez. The Venezuelans go to the polls again. On May the 20th, they will elect the president of the Bolivarian Republic of this state, and also the legislative councils. How transparent is the electoral process in this South American country? On this, I will talk with Tania D, Amelio, a member of the National Electoral Council, a principal rector of this organization.
How are you, Tania? Thank you for being with us. When the National Electoral Council calls for elections or whatever their scope, what is it based on?
Well, in principle, we have rules governing our electoral process. Certainly, we have the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, which was adopted in 1999 by the vast majority of the Venezuelan people. That is the first principle. Then, there are a number of standards that were also approved back then for the National Assembly, which typifies step by step which are the functions of the National Electoral Council, and certainly the functions of the National Electoral Council are referred. Then the National Electoral Council makes their respective convocations, and besides that makes a publication.
Who discuss?
We are 5 rectors in the National Electoral Council, where there are certainly made technical approaches resulting from an election, and we approve a chronogram in the National Electoral Council that at the moment anyone who is interested to know step by step the activities made by the National Electoral Council, it can be seen in the National Electoral Council website. Not only the Venezuelans can see step by step what will happen every day in the activities
There
of the
is
electoral
open to any
process.
public.
For anyone in the world who is interested, you can visit our page www.cne.gov.ve.
I suppose that there are particularities depending on the scope of the elections, or whether if they are presidential, state, municipal, legislative, even combined, as is the case of this electoral process.
Certainly, at this moment, we have presidential elections, and in addition to this, we have the legislative council elections. What's happening? Well, we certainly have 2 voting patterns. Some may ask how and why we have 2 electoral patterns. Of course, we have more than 20 million of voters enrolled in the electoral register. What will happen? The Venezuelans abroad can vote for the presidential election, but they may not vote for legislators because that is a local election.
From where they live, since they don't live in the
That's
country.
correct. Certainly, Venezuelans and foreigners residing here in the country can vote for legislators, and all Venezuelans can vote for the president. This election will be the number 25.
The election number 25.
This will be the number 25. Here in Venezuela, there is an electoral frequency.
What do you consider that gives shape to the different moments that the electoral process goes through for the sake of not being a tight, abrupt process?
Of course, it is important to note that this electoral process is born even in accordance with the political organizations in the National Electoral Council. A security agreement is signed where the candidates for president agree the date that was established at this time, which is on May the 20th. There we begin a series of activities. What happens? It was not an approach only from the National Electoral Council, but an agreement among the political organizations that make life in Venezuela, even agreeing in the process step by step. Why I say the step-by-step process? Because when we see on the schedule, we have 17 audits in the electoral process.
17 controls. What is control in this process?
In principle, the voter registration was audited. Each organization for political ends participates in the audit as well as its technicians, also participate in the auditing, and they currently also attend audits, which are some international escorts who have also been able to witness even organizations that make life in Venezuela, who also attend, such as national observers. Initially, an audit is a voter registration, and I emphasize in a voter registration because it is the electoral pattern. It's all the Venezuelans who vote. The data is given to non-political organizations, and they can see if they have any objections. Also, I invite you to visit our website of the National Electoral Council, where all the proceedings are published. In each audit, all political organizations have signed all audits where they have not seen any abnormality that could be viewed that the process is not transparent. What happens? An audit of the software has been done. The software of totalization, which is also one of the major audits, which currently can display records that organizations that are now in the political strife have been completely of agreement with these audits.
What requirements must be met by those who were at the time pre-candidates on parties or organizations for political purposes to register their applications in Venezuela?
We have to support in principle the following. Here in Venezuela, at the moment, there are 18 political organizations that can apply. This is how the process starts. Then also an initiative was created and a voter group that this referred to in our rules, that also as a political organization they can apply, and our standard indicates that it can apply if it's a political organization, groups of voters, and with an own initiative, even a man or a woman.
Independent candidate.
Exactly, an independent candidacy. Here in Venezuela, of the 18 organizations, 15 organizations for political purposes postulated for these elections. We have 15 political organizations who decided to make the application plus the voter group and the own initiative for presidents of the republic. Here, of course, in Venezuela, and even there are also postulates that are 251 for legislative council charges, but of course multiplying it in organizations that postulated for these candidates. So I can tell you that there is a wide participation in the issue of candidates for the legislative council and the presidential. We currently have 5 candidates nominated by organizations with faculty to make the application.
Now, those organizations and political purposes can decide, many of them, by a single candidate. That's why on the ballot we could find the face of the same candidate several times. Is that right?
Yes, Ray, our standard contemplates the process of partnerships. I emphasize in the standards because the process really is completely directed into the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and the rules are certainly already raised and approved here in Venezuela with the election issue. So what happens? There is an approach with partnerships. Several political organizations may ally themselves to run a single candidate, as what is happening. For example, the candidate and actual president of the Republic of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro. There are 10 organizations with political purpose that allied and postulated President Nicolás Maduro. Henry Falcón, which is the other candidate, allied 4 organizations for political purposes and then postulated to Henry Falcón. Bertucci made a request to the National Council election as a group of electors. Then, the group of voters are applying to Bertucci. Ratti is the other candidate. Ratti has its own initiative, and the other candidate, Reinaldo Quijada, which comes from a single organization for political purposes, which is UPP 89, we're seeing which organizations are allied to run a candidate and which organizations are not allied themselves as UPP 89, which is single. This is provided in our rules, the process of alliance between organizations for political purposes.
Now, Tania, what are the so-called election fairs, and how different are they from the drills?
Certainly for us, the fairs play an important role because it is the time where the institution gives voters information. In the electoral fairs, we envision a little what the ballot will look like. We give them access to one machine so people can practice in those machines. We place them in the streets and the schools and institutions that request it for us. We have deployed in all Venezuela a group of mates who can, in a way or another, relate the citizens with the technological issues. We even deliver them these materials so they take them to their homes so that they can share with their neighbors and explain also how you should vote. Of course, the simulation is one day only. The fairs last more than 15 days. The drill is in a single day. Why we do the drills? We have done them in other events. The drill is the first for the national council election to verify the technical process, how the machines are operating, how that horseshoe functions, if we have some things to improve.
For the audience who is watching us, what is the so-called horseshoe?
Certainly, in each center of voting, we have colleagues located in points. When we talk about the horseshoe, it's like this shape. What happens? We have a partner who has the system of authentication of the voter. Once it catches the pass mark, you can exercise the right to vote and enter to the stand where the machine is, and the card will be available, which differs from other processes. The last 3 processes we did last year, you voted directly on the machine. In this process, we're going to vote with a membrane and then select in the machine. Once we finish this point, look, we are doing the same movement. Once we finish this process, we come to cast the ballot. Once we have our proof card, you pass to the point after signing the book and place your fingerprint. Then, as it is in this way, we are used to refer at it like this because, well, it's a horseshoe that we use in drills, and we even can tell if it's convenient for voters. I can say that the membrane is a bit more large because in a drill, we had adults who said that the membrane was too small to exercise the right to vote. And we were improving this because all that's what we will see in the simulation, and then of course later in the electoral process.
That is to say that the simulation provides to the individual electoral council with an idea on how could be the day of the election.
And for organizations with political purposes, because that's another thing, we also get a material where we deliver it at the fairs and also deliver it to the organizations for political purposes to them, that the National Council gives them in the election so that they can make their campaigns with the model which will go to vote. Of course, those are not valid ballots. It says not valid ballots, and that day is also important for the organizations because they are seeing like this its electoral machinery as they are organized, as it is the way that they are participating. It is an important moment for both the institutions and organizations with political or voting groups and initiatives who are participating in that moment.
Let's talk briefly about one of the most important moments of the process, the candidates' campaigns. What should take into account both candidates and formation for political purposes as well as electoral authorities in order that they occur with total normality?
Initially, the National Electoral Council approves one special campaign regulation for every electoral moment in principle, and is also regulated by our rules of electoral processes, always framed in the rules, all framed in the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. First, it's established that organizations for political purposes that are not participating cannot do campaign, because who participated in the process is interested in a transparent campaign and calling the vote. Because if you're not participating and you had an organization for political gain, don't intend to call for the vote, then we must regulate those that way because it is more transparent than organizations that apply so that we can make the advertising principle. We do not allow the voting discouraging. Candidates or political organizations can't discourage the voting and can't tell for hate and violence. Calling for abstention would be the discouraging to vote. If you're in this election process, you have to call for participation, especially here in Venezuela, that the recent electoral processes during this time is voting here in Venezuela is not obligatory. And yet there is a 70% of participation in electoral processes. If that is the case, the campaigns should encourage voters to participate in this great electoral and democratic party which is made here in Venezuela.
After the campaign begins the internationally known period as closure or electoral silence. So what is this phase about?
When we speak of that silence, we begin to install the process. Install because there are two processes for the exercise to vote. We install the tables on Friday and the elections are on Sunday. Then we make the constitution as such here. So what happens? In the installation, the machines come to the polling places and we begin to check if everything is complete, if the machine came in good condition, because that's important, because they are produced here in the capital, here in Caracas. But 15 days before the elections, we deploy these machines to each of the states. Before the day of the elections, the machines are already in the states. What we do then is that we take them to the polling place that suits you, and there all this certainly directs to a task that corresponds to the National Electoral Council. At this time, there is no campaign and they cannot do the calling for the vote. The task follows from the beginning to end because the task is more arduous. But certainly, as there is no more campaign, seems to be there a silence. But that silence is not as such because there is us working for the National Electoral Council doing the hard work, which I definitely think is beautiful. And I want to highlight the theme of the polls, which in one way or another has been a topic and was requested even by organizations for political purposes that these centers of organization were in sites that they have always remained. I think it is important to say that certainly in the Constituent, we had to modify a few polling places by acts of violence because the National Electoral Council had that warranty the right to vote. People were threatened by political organizations that if they came out of their houses to vote, anything could happen to them. So it is there to move those centers of voting. We, at this time, all those polling places, despite everything that has happened, we moved them and request the organizations for political gain and again in their places of origin, because it must also be said that there were also schools which are the voting centers that did not want to open the doors. Then at this moment, at that time in the Constituent, all polling places are published on the page of the National Electoral Council, where any Venezuelan can see which is the center of vote which called upon him to vote and which is its
Who plans
address.
to role this part of the process? We'll go briefly because time is playing against us. The so-called Plan Republica.
Remember slightly that the Republic Plan articulates with the National Electoral Council, does work joined with the National Council election, the public ministry, and which directs the process is the National Electoral Council, which makes the Republic Plan. The Republican Plan protects our machines, protects the process that goes without balance, and also it certainly accompanies the process until the end, any kind of violence or obstruction at the time of exercising the right to vote.
Bueno, concluye el proceso electoral o parte del proceso electoral.
Well, let's suppose that the electoral process or part of the electoral process concludes the elections as such. If any of the candidates or parties disagreed with the first official results and thinks fraud, what happens?
In principle, it is good to say we have 17 audits. They are made before the elections, during the electoral process, and at the end of the electoral process, the audits follow with the organizations for political purposes. If there is a person who doesn't agree with the results, the law contemplates that he can challenge the voting process before the National Electoral Council. And the corresponding instances that is being regulated as it is, or if it isn't according to the results, he has the validity to challenge his process as contemplated by the regulations here in Venezuela.
What message do you send to Venezuelans regarding May the 20th?
Well, we must strengthen democracy. That the only ones that must and can certify this electoral process is Venezuelans. How are we going to certify and validate it? Participating on May the 20th.
Thank you very much, Tania.
Tania D, Amelio, Principal Rector of the National Electoral Council here in Venezuela. This is From Caracas. Thank you very much for watching us.